Hi, Bid. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, John.
Hello. Did did Nancy get through to you? Sh-
Nancy Ali?
She's yeah.
Yeah,
She
she's going to New York tonight, right?
okay, yeah. She
Yeah.
she wasn't sure if she had gotten that message through to you, so she had texted
Oh,
to
yeah,
make sure we told you.
yes, she did. So,
Okay.
yeah, thank you. I had to have the plumbing people back for my furnace today. And so it was just kind of a messed up day. I worked for ECS since like 6 o'clock this morning, and then I had to do this with my furnace.
Right.
So I didn't get a chance to answer her.
Okay.
But yeah, we're down Agnes, Linda, and Nancy tonight.
Okay.
Hello, Barbara. Hello, Jenna. Thank you, John.
How are you, Tammy?
Good. How are you guys tonight?
Good, good.
Wasn't sure I can hear you, Barbara. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay.
Doing okay?
Everything's good. Thank you.
Yay. Yay. It's good to hear. It's good to hear.
Yes.
We have parishioners who went to Florida last week, 2 weeks ago, and they said it was nothing but rain. So are you in the middle of rain or?
No, where
Oh.
in Florida did they go?
I don't know. They were really disappointed. They went for like 2 weeks and they said it like rained practically the whole time.
I wonder if that was the West Coast, because the East Coast, we didn't have rain. It was
Okay.
chilly.
It's
Florida
chilly.
chilly. I mean, it's it's not chilly for
Yeah.
anybody else, but
Yeah.
here we consider it chilly.
Yeah, I know, right? Because your blood thins out. I
Yeah.
think I would too, but yeah. Oh,
But today, absolutely gorgeous today.
oh, wasn't
78 was the high. I mean, how are you going to do better than that?
no, you're not. I think we did. I think we broke like 40 maybe here
Yeah.
today.
Be happy to
Mhm.
trade with you. It's very
Mhm.
cold and rainy here.
It's awful.
You can come down and stay with me, but no, I'm not going there. I did my
No,
time in December. It was way too cold.
oh, way too cold, right? Yeah, yeah.
Oh
And that
gosh, yeah.
blizzard, oh my God. Yeah.
I wasn't up there for that. Well, I was up there because I was up in the Hudson Valley, so there was a lot of snow, but I
Oh,
didn't have what you had after that.
yeah,
Thank
that
God
was,
I was in Florida at that
I
point.
know, Barbara, right? That was sinful what we got.
Yeah,
But then,
yeah.
yeah, my friend in Wisconsin got like almost 3 feet. So,
Wow, wow.
ugh. And
My
yesterday,
my my nephew is out in Wisconsin. That's yeah, same
oh,
thing. It's ridiculous. He's out in
Yeah.
Marquette,
yeah,
the college, yeah, over by Milwaukee. So he didn't
yep.
get as much snow, but he said it was brutally cold.
That's what she
Brutally,
said
yeah.
too. I mean, she told me, this is so weird. She told me, hey, Lydia, she told me that she doesn't, how is it? She doesn't, if she turns her furnace off by June, she's lucky.
Wow.
Isn't that
Oh wow.
disgusting?
Wow.
Ugh, like, ugh. But then she doesn't
We
use her air.
we met people down here. They're from up around Toronto, and
Hmm.
they're down for a couple of months. And I said, Toronto. And I said, my gosh, they have to have like two seasons, winter and July 4th or something.
I know,
I
right?
mean, I can't even imagine. And they
Awful.
said pretty much that's how it is. It's just very cold up there.
Awful, awful. But
Yeah.
then I guess, I guess we just get used to what we got. Although I complain, so maybe not.
You can
So
get used
welcome.
to anything, I guess.
Yeah, right. Take it, right. If I'm standing, it's a good day. Welcome everyone tonight. This is it. This is our class tonight. We've got one in New York. We got one at a fundraiser. We've got somebody who had something else. So here we are tonight. I hope they didn't all chicken out of the binding story. So um, this is a difficult one, but hopefully they'll catch up on Facebook. So we'll do a quick prayer and then we'll get started into this text. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for bringing us to this night and for the opportunity to study your word together. We thank you for the presence that you promise us when two or more are gathered. We pray, oh Lord, that you make your presence known to us tonight, and so that we can hear from these really difficult passages what we need to hear, and so that we can honor you better in this very broken world. All this we ask in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Amen.
So tonight we're going to be talking about the binding of Isaac, right? The Akedah, as it's called in Hebrew. And for like, if you're feeling like really perplexed about this passage and like, what is this about? Like, you're not alone. For centuries, for millennium, right? The scholars, both in the Christian and Jewish faith, have been, trying to interpret what this thing means. And the questions are certainly like how could God test somebody in this really gruesome way, right? How could Abraham even go forward with this, right? And then there's this other question of how does Christ fit into this passage? So you guys have been with me for several years now in Bible study, and you know that I'm not I'm not keen in bringing in, unless it's prophecy, I'm not keen in bringing the New Testament into writings like Genesis, right? Because there was no way that was on the minds, right? The Messiah was not on the minds of these people who put this book together. However, it's hard to deny, right, that there are similarities between Isaac and Jesus, right? They're both sons. They both are at least, almost sacrificed. One is sacrificed, one is not, right? And they're both kind of substitutes. So it's really hard. In fact, like the patristic writers, the church fathers and medieval scholars, were very keen on saying that, Abraham is sort of like the symbolizes God, and Isaac symbolizes Christ, right? They were very good in saying that. However, I would say to everyone that in the New Testament there is nothing that talks about the binding, right? Abraham is talked about certainly in the New Testament, but it's always about Abraham's faith. It doesn't particularly pinpoint the binding. It talks about Abraham's faith to God and his obedience to God. And that's a really good jumping part. That's a really good place to jump off this study of the binding, right? Is I want you to remember that more than anything, this is a story of faith. Okay. It's a story of faith. And we started to talk a little bit about that last week, right? The context of where this story comes from, right? We know that Abraham did not have like the most pristine faith in the world, right? It wasn't consistent. There were many times that Abraham was very obedient to God. There were equally many times as Abraham was not obedient to God, right? This is not a perfect faith. He's not righteous like Noah. Remember, Abraham is chosen and for God to groom, to teach how to be righteous. Noah's born righteous. Abraham, God has to use him like, he molds him like clay. So we see, these failings of Abraham. Very much like our own faith, right? Our own faith isn't perfect. There are many times when we are also very faithful and obedient, and many times when we question and we fall out of line, we fall out of place, right? I mean, that's the gift of God's grace, is that God is always willing to take us back. But when we think about the binding, we have to look at it in the context of Abraham's faith journey. Right? And the fact that he shuffles around when he's obedient and not. That's the first thing I want you to remember. Think of this binding in context of his faith journey. And the second thing I want to draw your attention to is that this is really the climax of Abraham's narrative. And by that I mean, yes, he's going to go on for a couple more chapters. And remember, Genesis doesn't necessarily go in chronological order. And so probably he lived many years after this. We know that he dies at 175. He probably lives quite some time after the binding, right? But remember, again, this is theology. His position in the next few chapters after the binding, this is the peak of his story. This is the climax. And then after that, it's going to start to flow into the transition to Isaac, right? The heir has been produced. The faith has been tested. The faith has succeeded. And now it is time for the next generation to take its place. So this is really like the last time we're going to really, really see Abraham in a major role. After that, he's going to be slowly transitioned out, and Isaac will be slowly rising, Isaac and Rebekah. That said, if we look at the binding as the climax, the zenith, right, of the Abraham narrative, his call would be the start of that narrative, right? When God calls Abraham, and the binding, when the faith is tested and succeeds. And we find that when we compare those two, Genesis 12 and Genesis 22, that there's actually a lot of similarities between the two, right? They form a perfect bookend to Abraham's story. And again, we can say that because we know it's the end technically of his story. So there's a lot of things that these two stories have in common. Again, to form this kind of neat bookend to the beginning of his journey and the end of his journey. And I'm just going to pull my notes because I don't want to forget any of this, right? But the first thing, can you think of something that these two stories have in common?
Go back to 12.
So they both begin with a command.
As I said, it's a commandment from God.
Yeah, they both begin with a command from God. And what is that command from God?
Well, he has to go.
He has to go, right? That's right, John, right? They both command Abraham to go forth, right? Lech lach is the term that's used in Hebrew, right? And that is found nowhere else in the Bible except for these two passages. So God commands Abraham to go forth in both of these passages. Right. Anything else we can say? There's quite a few of them. I try to move them down in order. So is Abraham told when he's called in 12 where to go? Like when God calls him? Does God say to him, I'm going to send you over here to Canaan?
No, he just says, go from your country. Right?
Yeah. Yep. No destination, right? No destination in the binding either. Right. God doesn't tell Abraham where they're going. And in fact, it's quite quirky that Abraham loads some wood, right, to go on this journey because Judah is woody, right? There's wood in Judah. He wouldn't have done that if he wasn't expecting, like not knowing where he was going. And so both of these are leaps of faith, right? This go forth is two leaps of faith. There is no destination in either one of them. And you would probably agree that both of them have a really weighty demand to them, right? God is asking a lot of him. In the first story, right, in Genesis 12, when God calls him to leave everything behind, right, God is essentially asking him to cut himself off from his past. And now in the binding, God is essentially testing him to cut off his future, right? Isaac would have been his future. And so the first story, we see a cut from the past. The second one, we're looking at a potential cut from the future. Right. Abraham is to leave his father forever. And here the assumption is that he's to leave his son forever. The building of an altar concludes both of these stories. When Abraham makes it to the promised land, where it's his destination, he builds an altar. There's actually 3 altars in his narrative that are built. This is the only one that's built that actually offers a sacrifice. The other altars do not, right? They are to represent a turning back to God, but they both conclude with the building of an altar. They both have the promise of divine blessing. In fact, we're going to see in the binding that blessing is now going to expand because Abraham passes the test of faith. They both include traveling together, right? Abraham doesn't go on either one of these journeys alone. He brings his family, his household. He brings a lot, even though he wasn't supposed to. He goes on this journey, right? He brings Isaac, and he brings who else? Did you guys catch it? Who else he brings?
In 12 or in 22?
In 22.
Oh, well, there's 2 other people. I'm forgetting who they are.
They're his servants.
Servants. Okay.
Yep. So he's traveling. He's not traveling alone, right? He's accompanied by people he's either acquired in Haran, meaning servants, or where he comes from, right? Haran. Or he's got these servants, right? He's not alone. They both end with travels to the Negev, right? That's where they will end up. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. I'm just going to let it ring. The really interesting thing is that in 12, God speaks to Abraham for the first time. And in 22, God will speak to Abraham for the last time. Right. All of these things from 12 are starting to conclude, right? They're all coming to this perfect ending. They both stress a journey, the altar, and a blessing, which I think we already covered. Yeah. So together they form this perfect package, right? Everything comes full circle in that. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, it's interesting.
They both mention the covenant as well. Correct. 12 and 22. I mean, he reaffirms that he's going to make a great nation out of
Yes, Barbara.
Isaac.
Yes, the blessing, right? In 12, it's not yet called a covenant, but the blessing, right? Yeah, exactly. There's a blessing involved in both of these, and again in 22, that blessing is going to get even bigger because Abraham has been obedient. So yes, so essentially yes, the blessing is involved in both of them. God is saying, if there's going to be a reward for this, essentially. Questions, comments before we start to dig into this? So again, look at this as like like the completion of this narrative. And again, look at this through the eyes of Abraham's faith, because it's a bit uncomfortable. So let's start with 22:1, right? After these things, God tested Abraham. Right. So the Hebrew word is actually prove, right? And we see that God, right? We always think, oh, wow, God doesn't really test us. But there are times, scripture does show times when God tests, right? I tend I don't think that it's like a purposeful thing that God's sitting around and saying, let's see what I can do to these people. I think that it's more about, it's how God weighs our loyalties. And we see these instances of testing, especially with the rise of monotheism, right? When loyalties in the Bible could have gone elsewhere than to Yahweh, right? There's choices to be made, whether it's a God or whether it's a culture, whether it is, I don't know, today, family, friends, on social media. Whenever there's a choice to be made, right? There's always situations where God's, watches how we prove our loyalties. And I think that's a better way to think about it. I never think that God throws something in our way just to, tempt us. But I think, situations happen in the world where we feel torn between things, and God has his eye on those decisions we make. And we certainly know that testing in the New Testament is also part of the idea of the New Testament, right? Because we certainly pray for that in the Lord's Prayer. Lead us not into the temptation. Don't let us be tempted to anything that's going to make us go astray from you. So this is not anything new in either of the testaments, right? It's different. This testing is different, but it's not a new concept that God tests to see where those loyalties, for us to prove our loyalties, to see if our loyalty is to God or whatever this other thing that looks really good is. Mind you, the reader knows this. The reader knows when we begin this story that this is a test, right? Abraham doesn't know that. I mean, if you put yourself in the place of Abraham, I mean, it's really, this is really quite frightening. Abraham doesn't know that. But Abraham does know something, right? He's been with God long enough, many, 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 many years, to know that God has made this promise to him of being the father of many nations, that nations will be blessed through him and his descendants. He's heard it for many, many, many years. He's heard it for maybe 50 years at this point. He certainly knows that God has always proven to be faithful, even when he's taken matters into his own hand. So he's got, he doesn't know that this is going to be a test, but he does have a lot of background information and experience with God at this point, right? But this raises the tension in this story, right? God tests Abraham, and he says to him, he says, Abraham, he calls him by name. And Abraham says this wonderful thing, here I am, right? You see this throughout the Hebrew Bible. We have a hymn that's dedicated to that. Here I am, Lord. The Hebrew word, it doesn't mean like, ta-da, here I am, look at me, like I'm right here. Right? It doesn't mean that. In Hebrew, it means take all of me. I'm offering up everything I have to you, God. Body, mind, and soul. It's all yours. It's a huge commitment. And then notice this, right? What God says. He gives this command in threes, right? Take, and these threes intensify as they go, right? It builds to the tension of the story. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, right? It's very much like God's command in 12, when God says to Abraham, leave everything, leave your father, leave your homeland, right? That was also an escalating triple play, right? There were 3 things there were 3 things here. This is the first time, interestingly enough, that love appears in the Bible, and it's related to Isaac, this father and son relationship. It's showing how much Abraham treasures this relationship with Isaac. But the word love is used. And then he throws the whammy, right? Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. Right? The language in this is very much master servant, where God is the master, where Abraham is the servant. And so, like any servant, Abraham responds like a servant, right? He responds as a servant. He doesn't question it. It says, so early in the morning he rises, right? Every time that Abraham does something monumental, he gets up early in the morning to do it. And also the Philistine king, also, if you remember from our readings there, right? It means something monumental, right? You get up early in the morning, you get to it. And all of these verbs, right, that they use are all used to show Abraham's compliance to this, to his unconditional obedience, right? He rises, he saddles, right? His servants would have certainly saddled the donkey, but it doesn't happen, right? Abraham does. He's being obedient to God's call. He rises, he saddles, he took, right? He cut the wood, and then he sets out, right? These are all purposefully used to indicate that Abraham is not questioning God. And notice there's no words from Abraham. And that's because we see in Genesis, right? We never get an inside view of emotions, right? And that's because Genesis is kind of written that actions betray our emotions, right? And here we don't know what his emotions are, but certainly he's doesn't seem upset, right? He's complying to God. He's complying like a good servant. Questions, comments on this?
Yeah, I was gonna, you answered it now. I was curious about why no response
Mm-hmm.
when God says, take your son
Mm-hmm.
and make him a burnt offering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but I guess there hadn't been any, as you were pointing out, in earlier chapters either. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's Sarah who responds to God. It's
Mm-hmm.
not
She
Abraham.
does. Yeah, she does. Yeah. And again, because Genesis kind of hides these emotions and betrays our emotions through actions, right? And what this is meant to say is that, he is like unconditionally going along what God has told him to do, right? And we saw him do something, without question also when God says to him, listen to Sarah and, expel Hagar, he is also obedient to that. And I want to just say this, right? So why all of a sudden is Abraham being compliant in these last couple chapters? Like something has entered the story that wasn't there before when he wasn't being obedient.
Well, he got his heir.
Yeah, he
I,
got
I
his
mean,
heir.
God fulfilled his promise. So,
Absolutely,
yeah.
Barbara. Yeah, he got his heir, right? So now there's this different relationship, this different faith of Abraham's, right? He's got the heir, he's got part of the promise. He's also got a well in Canaan, right? But but Isaac counts more, right? He's got his heir. So he is now just working on pure faith. And he's just trusting in God at this point because he sees that God is actually, coming through on these promises. Even when God has this, make him a burnt offering. It's going to be a burnt offering, right? Eh, that stops all of us in our tracks, right? That's huge. That's huge. So first, how do all of you feel about that?
Not good.
Mm-hmm. In what way, John?
It just seems, well, I mean, it seems cruel,
Mm-hmm.
seems
Yeah.
unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is hardly an original thought with me,
Mm-hmm.
but the whole notion you were talking about before on testing
Mm-hmm.
and God seeing what we choose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I get that at one level, but like I think like many people, I struggle with, yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
like I didn't ask to be put to that choice, God.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you created me. Why are you making me make a choice? And there are repercussions if I choose wrongly. Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ask
Mm-hmm.
to be put in that. It
Mm-hmm.
seems at a very simplistic level, it seems like unfair.
Yeah. Okay. So what I would say to that, John, right, is that, I mean, I think that that's where scripture comes in, right? In that God gives us this blueprint of how God expects us to act so that creation does stay good like it was in the beginning. And so whenever we're brought to these circumstances that really do make us choose between, worldly things and God, that we kind of know what we should choose, right? But what we know we should choose isn't always what feels good to choose.
Right.
Um, is that a fair statement?
Sure, absolutely.
Hmm. Yeah. And
But
it, hmm
it does seem again, it's a simplistic approach, I can see,
Mm-hmm.
but there does seem some difference in saying, well, here are the commandments, here are
Mm-hmm.
the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, and if you don't follow them, unhappy things are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That would seem qualitatively different than, but now I'm going to set little traps for you. I mean, it's like, problem is I always look at everything through the eyes of a
Mm-hmm.
lawyer. I mean, it's
Yeah.
entrapment. We understand you're not supposed to break the law, but the
Mm-hmm.
government's not allowed to entice you into breaking the law.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's
Yeah.
like, but I didn't, didn't have that plan to begin. That's the crux of entrapment.
Mm-hmm.
But for
Mm-hmm.
your involvement, I wouldn't have broken that law anyway. Well,
Mm-hmm.
again, strikes me in an overly simplistic way. It's a little bit like entrapment. Okay, it's giving us the commandments and we will obey them or not at our
Mm-hmm.
peril.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're like creating situations.
Mm-hmm.
They're not evolving organically.
Yeah, this one does feel like a created situation, isn't it? It does, right? I mean, he
That's right. It's not
specifically
like
tells
Abraham
him.
set out to kill his son.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'm gonna say to you also about this is that the point behind the story is faith.
Oh, sure. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
certainly, that resonates. I get that
Mm-hmm.
to me, that seems, I don't mean obvious in the simplistic way or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, churlish way.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that would seem to be the thrust of the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's faith. He was absolutely faithful up to the moment
Mm-hmm.
that he's holding the.
Yes. And I'm gonna say something else very shocking right here, is that this would have not shocked its original readers, this request of God's. We know from scripture that child sacrifice was done up until the time of the Babylonian exile, including Israel. Israel was practicing child sacrifice.
And to prove what point? I don't know, to accomplish what?
Oh, an offering to God, right? They were giving their firstborn to God.
Okay.
And so it is probably a Canaanite practice that Israel adopts, but we certainly know from scripture, right? From Kings, from Second Kings, clearly tells us that at least two kings of Judah were practicing child sacrifice. One was Ahaz, the other was I can never pronounce his name right. Manasseh, Masseh, and they were both in the 8th and the 7th centuries, right? They made their children walk through fire. So if you ever read that, right, in Kings and Second Kings, that's what it means. They were sacrificing. So outside of Jerusalem, right, what we call Gehenna now, right, there was this area that child sacrifices were done. Hence the name hell, right? And it was just this huge pit, even by the time of Christ, when Christ refers to it, right? Everyone knew that that was the site of child sacrifice. And and so, I mean, we even see it in the prophet Micah. Let me just get this, right? What does Micah say? So Micah is the 8th century prophet, if you remember from our minor prophet class. So he addresses Yahweh worshipers with this: what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Should I give my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Right. And Micah, of course, replies, God doesn't require that. God does not require burnt offerings. God requires justice, right? And kindness, right? Requires you to walk in the path of God. God doesn't require that. But what it shows us is that up until the 8th century, there's still this lingering thing in the minds of at least some Yahweh worshipers that child sacrifice is acceptable. And this will be addressed. I mean, they're at least contemplating it, right? This will be addressed in many of the prophets. In Jeremiah will be another one that addresses child sacrifice, but it will also be addressed in Leviticus. because the Levites become ultimately the sacrifice that's consecrated to God, right? So all of the Levite, everyone in the tribe of Levite is the priesthood, right? They're required to become priests and to serve God. And that was the substitute for the firstborn that would have been given to God. So, that said, when the original audience heard this or read this, right, they would not have had the reaction we do. Right. And the idea behind that firstborn, why is the firstborn to be consecrated to God, right? Is that it's an acknowledgement that all life comes from God. And if we don't show God that respect that life comes from him by sacrificing our first sons, then it's going to mess up our fertility. God won't give life anymore.
If it
Mm.
if it was more, it was not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not. What's the point? I would think, like, and it's so shocking to us,
Mm-hmm.
but it wouldn't have been shocking to them. What is the point then of the story for the reader in whenever Genesis was written?
The faith of Abraham.
Okay.
And solely fidelity to God. That Abraham had waited, God, 100 years for this child, right? And now there's this conflict. Who is Abraham going to love more? Is he going to love the gift more than he loves the giver? Mhm. Because if he loves the gift more than he loves the giver, then where does the promise go then? Right? Because that can be screwed up at any time then.
So Tammy,
Yeah, Barbara.
would you say then this story,
Yeah.
would be a polemic against what was the, I guess, acceptable practice of the day?
Yes, Barbara. So there are some scholars who will say that, right? In fact, when I was in seminary, that's what we were taught, that this is a polemic, that this is so horrific that when people would have heard or read this, they would have been horrified by this and saw how awful child sacrifice is. And there are scholars who say that, including mine that I studied under. And I'm not going to, and I want you to be your own scholars, right? I want you to decide for yourselves, like what your faith tells you about this. I would just say this: there is nothing in this story that says this is awful. the we feel
Or that it's even an extreme ask. I
right.
mean, it makes it seem like, I mean, picks up his son, okay, let's go, and
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the thing that I would say, but yes, Barbara, the answer is yes to that. There are scholars who say this is a polemic. It might act as a polemic to us. I'm not really convinced that it's because you're absolutely right. Abraham is obedient to it. But I want you also, right, to take into consideration this is somebody who has seen, this promise, this impossible promise come to fruition in the birth of Isaac, right? What seemed impossible actually happened. So Abraham has to be going into this with a little bit of a different mindset than he went at other times, right? Into other situations. And by that, I would add that it certainly has to cross his mind at some point that if I kill Isaac, the promise is dead.
but God did make that promise, and I mean, I guess, yeah, I
Mm-hmm,
guess it's his faith that,
mm-hmm,
okay, he's telling me to do this, but he's also
mm-hmm.
told me he will make a great nation out of Isaac, because he's very,
Yes.
with Hagar, he sends Hagar and Ishmael one way, so he did say Isaac would be the heir, so I guess he's just going on based on the faith. My faith
Going on.
isn't that strong, I don't think.
Yeah. going on faith, right? Because
Right.
because God has promised this, and there has been evidence of this promise starting in land and in progeny, right? These things are happening. And there has to be something in his mind that says, if I kill Isaac, right, that's the end of this promise. And what sense would any of that make, right? And the fact that Abraham is thinking along those lines, right, is, let me say, when he actually talks to Isaac, Isaac said to his father, um, but where, so look at where is it, 7, right?
Oh, where he asked him where the lamb is. Yeah, the
Yeah,
offering
right. And what does Abraham say in 8?
that God will provide it.
Yeah. Mm,
Hmm.
right, right. So Abraham's got something. Now, what does Abraham think that God is going to provide? Does he think it's Isaac? Does he think, well, like, what did Abraham have in his mind? But he's certainly working on the basis of this like unconditional faith, right? And the actual Hebrew has the verbs kind of has like the sentence structure kind of construed, right? It the Hebrew actually says God, he will provide. And so Abraham is working totally on faith. It changes that a little bit, right? It changes where Abraham is in this.
Wait a
It
minute,
doesn't make it.
can you give us that one again? I lost that train. It
Yeah.
changes what?
So the fact, John, that in 8, when Isaac questions,
Right,
where's the sacrificial lamb, right?
right.
Abraham just replies, God will provide. He's trusting that God is going to make this right according to God's promise. Which at some point, like I said, has to cross Abraham's mind that like that promise goes nowhere if Isaac is dead. The promise stops. Like, what would have been the point of any of it? God has now, again, remember, the provision of God is resurrection out of death, right? God has already done that. And so Abraham's working on the assumption that God is doesn't know what God's going to do, but is convinced that God will provide. God, he will provide. The other one is Abraham, he obeyed. God, he will provide. So he's working on some kind of basis of faith here.
But so, okay, if I think that way, then it's almost like you're saying that Abraham is waiting for the 11th hour for
Mm-hmm.
somebody to swoop in and save the
Mm-hmm.
day, which would be God.
Yeah, yeah, and he's got that faith, right? He's just gonna move, he's gonna just keep moving the way God's told him, convinced that, that the right thing in God's plan is gonna happen. And if God has promised that he's gonna be the father of these great nations, and Abraham certainly knows that it's gonna come through the air. Gosh, after all of this, when God had to come out and say to Sarah and Isaac, Sarah is the mother of the seed, right? Then there has to be more to this. There has to be more to God's promise because God wasn't going to take it this far and then actually kill the seed.
But if Abraham actually
Mhm.
knows that, that kind of vitiates the significance of the choice. And if he knows it's all just it's play acting, it's going to end up fine. Doesn't that detract from the unyielding faith, his complete commitment?
Yeah, so I don't know, John. I mean, I don't, I think that sentence just betrays where Abraham is, what he's thinking, right? I imagine it had to be still extremely unnerving and scary, right? anytime we step out of our comfort zone. And listen, and we are called in faith to do that. We might not be asked to sacrifice our kids or people we love, but there are uncomfortable times. And I'm trying to think of an example. Um, and do we say, yeah, God will make this all right in the end, but it doesn't take away that scary feeling, and we can always go back to being not faithful. So
Yeah.
that doesn't, I don't think it deters from his faith.
No, but see,
I,
I think
Mhm,
I think I was the counter to, well, maybe he
mhm,
believed at the last moment he would be saved, but the son would be saved. But to the view that no, Abraham actually thought this was going to be the end of Isaac. I mean, he
mhm,
says he evades his question, Isaac's
mhm.
question, when he
Yeah, he
says,
does. Mhm,
well, God will provide, and doesn't,
mhm,
oh, actually, you're the sacrifice. He doesn't say that. And
mhm,
he also,
mhm.
before that, he basically lies to the servants. He says, you stay here and we will
Oh,
make the offering and we will return.
but that's another betrayal of the faith, right? That was a good pickup, John. I totally forgot that.
I thought he was just lying. I thought he was just lying to the
Mm-mm.
to the
No,
servants.
no, it's again put there as a point of his faith. Yeah, it was good you saw that. Yes.
That, but I want to make sure I have the point. Is that
Mhm.
how does that underscore his faith? Or how does that
Oh, because
prove
he's
his
telling
faith?
him we will return.
I
Oh, so
kind of
he
I kind of thought that he was telling that was to ensure the servants wouldn't interfere in any way.
Oh, and there's scholars who will interpret it like that too, Barbara. Yeah, I mean we don't know. We don't know, right? We're not given the reason he said that, but the we is really important because he's
Yeah.
not saying I'll return. Maybe he will. I'm definitely coming back. I don't know about him, right? He doesn't say I'll return, right? He says we will return. So he's got these two statements of faith here. And yes, probably if he would have taken the servants, they might have tried to stop this, right?
Yeah. But then I
Hmm.
agree with John, and it belies the underlying um, message, which is this unyielding faith. If he kind of thought, no, we'll be back. Don't worry. This is all just
Hmm.
a charade, so to
Hmm.
speak, and
Hmm.
it'll be fine, and we'll be back. Well, then there is no bite to the story. There's no.
So, so I would say it's very much like playing Russian roulette, right? There's still the risk. I mean, did he know 100% for sure? He doesn't. He doesn't know 100% for sure what's going to happen. He has no idea. What he's doing though is saying that I trust whatever God's plan to be is right, and I'm going to fulfill that because God has got the right plan and purpose. I mean, it is like Russian roulette, right? We spin the trigger and we've got this many chances we survive, and this one we don't. I mean, he's still walking on the edge. It's not like he knows for certain. I mean, who knows, right? Maybe there was some other plan, but what it does say is that he's taking what he knows about God, and he's using it as a basis of trust, right? He's trusting that whatever God's plan is, it's going to be the right one. And that's really important for us, right? I mean, for Abraham, yes, God was somehow physically present, right, in his life. There was this relationship. And we have a relationship with God, but it's much different than this. We base our relationship on God, through scripture and from our experience. It's how do we make those decisions, right? Do we make those decisions, those faith decisions in our life based on what we know about God and just walk into that fire and trust, it's going to be okay? That's a really hard thing to do, right? Because sometimes, like the crucifixion of Christ, the things that happen that are part of God's plan aren't comfortable, right? In the crucifixion, it actually comes to death, right? Very much the same scenario where Christ says, if it's possible, take this cup, but if it's your will, then your will be done, right? That doesn't have well, it does, right? It it does have the happy ending, right? Of course. But that actually has, that the consequences of faith, right? There is actually a killing. There's actually a death. What brings Jesus to the cross? What makes him go through with that? When as God, he could have walked away from that. Right? He could have ended it like that. But he doesn't. He puts his trust in God's will. And that's very much what Abraham is doing here, right? It's the same trust in God. Jesus throws it up in the air. Hey, listen, if this can be taken, please do. But whatever your will is, I trust in it. And I think that's very much what is happening with Abraham too. I mean, both Jesus and Abraham are trusting that in the end, God will do the right thing. Maybe not be what we consider to be the right thing. But like we said a few weeks ago, the purpose is always bigger than us. Does that help any?
Yeah, I would have failed the test though.
Mm-hmm. We do fail the test. We
Me
fail
too.
we fail the test all the time, right? Because we're human. We're human and we fail the test. But the wonderful thing is that there were many, many tests that Abraham failed. But we've got this wonderful thing called grace, right? That we can fail many, many, many tests. But we always have the grace of God. It doesn't banish us from God's sight. It doesn't exclude us from God's love. God loves us no matter. But this story really helps us to grow our faith and our trust in God based on what we know about God, right? Doesn't mean that God's going to save us at the last minute. Again, I want you to think about Christ, right? But I also want you to think in terms of Christ, that you can never have the crucifixion without the resurrection. They must always go together. And Genesis shows us this, right? This is the precursor to Christ. In that, remember what we talked about, I think it was last week, that the message here that is when things look like or feel like or are really, we're surrounded by death. The message of Genesis is that God always, always brings life out of death. That's why when we think about the crucifixion and how could God let his son die on the cross, we must always pair it with the resurrection. You can't have one without the other. And don't feel bad, because this story has perplexed, scholars down through the ages, to the point of it at, like later Judaism feels like they have to explain this, right? And they do in the Book of Jubilees. They're like, no, you know what? This wasn't God. This was very Job-like. This was Satan. This was Satan that was testing Isaac. Excuse me, Abraham. and they rewrite the story, right? And they said, no, this was like the lead demon, and this was, and they make this up in the Book of Jubilee, right? And then the Aramaic paraphrase of the Bible, right? The Targum, um, has Abraham openly say to Isaac, you're going to be sacrificed. And Isaac's response is, well, then, do it correctly so that I don't flail and I'm the perfect victim and I mean, it was that disturbing that they felt that they had to rewrite this because it is that disturbing. But faith is disturbing. Faith disturbs us. And like I said, we're not going to get tested by killing, people we love, right? But you're going to be tested every day. We're tested every day in some way. Something comes up against our loyalty and our trust in God, right? Does God send them? I don't believe that. That is not my theology at all. I just believe it's part of life, right? And that there, and then God sits up and takes notice of how we do that. But again, like if we think about God throwing all of these obstacles in our course, we're going to get back to that God who is just this God of vengeance and trying to trip us up. That's not what Genesis teaches us. This is a story about, it is a theology and it is a story about faith. Right? Because if we're going to do that, right? If we're going to do that in this story, then why aren't we doing it in the Gospels, right? When people are saying, oh, well, Jesus's father is just so much kinder and good than that God in the Old Testament. But the fact is Jesus's father let him go to the cross and die and be crucified. Why, right? Out of this tremendous love that God has for humanity. This is done. This is done out of love, right? So that Abraham's descendants are able to take this promise of God and this promise of hope forward. If Abraham would have failed this test, right, we wouldn't be here tonight. We're here because of this faith of Abraham. And this love of God that says, you know what? I'm not content to be separated from this creation I made. I don't care how wayward you are. It doesn't sit right. I created humanity to be in relationship with me. And yeah, you can screw it up, but I will go to any ends to get that relationship back. Because as I always say to everybody, God didn't need us. God's a Trinity. God had all the relationship and love God needed. Doesn't need us poking around and breaking hearts and doing all that stuff we do. It doesn't need us. God must love us to go to these extremes. Because Christ could have thrown up his hands and said, I'm done. Go back to heaven, done. Questions, comments?
I have one question. In the
Go for it,
beginning
Barbara.
of this story,
Yeah.
it's God who speaks to Abraham. But
Yes.
when Isaac is being saved, it's the angel of the Lord that speaks to Abraham.
Yeah, so in Genesis, Barbara, there's kind of this, there's not like consistent.
Did I lose her?
She's frozen. Tammy, I don't know if you can hear us, but you're frozen. I'll try to email her or text her.
Okay.
Probably doesn't know. She'll only know when she realizes we're not saying anything. I just texted. We'll see if she picks it up.
I'm with you, John. I would have failed this test.
It's she's probably gonna log back in. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's to me like to me it is one of the three most difficult passages for
Oh,
me.
yeah. Very hard to digest, yes.
It just seems like a insurmountable. Okay, Tammy says my internet went down. I'm going to see if I can reconnect.
Okay.
But I'm not seeing my network, so I'm not sure what's going on with Optimum. So let's give her a minute.
Yeah,
and,
that's fine.
see if that happens. Barbara, I'm sure you've said this. Where are you in Florida?
I am in the Villages. It's Central
Oh,
Florida, right?
sure.
Right by Ocala.
Yep.
Yeah.
The famous Villages. You're famous.
Yes, the very famous Villages. Yes. I actually, when I first came down, I came to the West Coast, St. Petersburg, because my father was there.
Mhm.
And then we went over to the East Coast by Daytona.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And then, so now we're here. I have friends here, and it's just there's a lot more to do, much more active.
So how bad are the stereotypes we get? How inaccurate are the stereotypes we get of the Villages?
John, I swear, if it's going on, I swear to you, it's not anywhere near me. I will tell you this though, they have people God bless them, in their 90s, and they are playing pickleball. They put you to shame how active they are.
Wow.
Tennis, it's amazing to me. They just had I mean, obviously he's not running across the court. Guy just turned 100 years old,
Wow.
and they had a pickleball game with him. It was
Jeez.
like double, so he was playing.
Wow,
He
I'd
was
be
playing.
scared to be in that game.
Me too.
I don't want anything to happen to him.
But he, they're very active. Everybody's always out walking. It's nice, and it's gorgeous. It's an absolutely gorgeous place.
Yeah, I've never been there, but of course, you hear about it and read about it, and so many people. You hear of people who know people there.
Yes, and there are, they have the squares, so there's a lot of people that they're retired. They drink, and then they drive their golf carts like maniacs, and so you have that. You have different groups of people, but for the most part,
Sure.
just everybody's kind of just very active, very happy,
Good.
involved in a lot of things. The theater down here is crazy. Everybody, I guess, whoever wanted to be on a stage, they just join. And
now they have their chance.
yes, and they do the background stuff. So even if they're not, talented enough to be in front of on the stage, they work in the lights. It's crazy how happy everybody.
Well, that's very
seems
cool.
to be. Yeah. Wait a minute, let me see.
I'm thinking we should.
Went down. I'm not sure what's happening with. I wanted to try. She's trying to connect. It says
Okay.
she's trying to connect. Oh, but it's not even showing my network. So hold that question and write it to me so that I can answer it for you and John both.
All right. I think it's time for us to log off.
I think it's time for us to go.
All right. Well, have a good rest of the evening.
You too. Enjoy.
Take care now.
Take care. Bye-bye.